The second unit in this module on metacognition and self-regulated learning, self-regulation. In this second unit, we would like to further explore two concepts which are in fact quite central in the whole domain of metacognition and self-regulation: metacognitive awareness and metacognitive strategies. First, metacognitive awareness. That's again more the declarative knowledge side, as we discussed it already, whereas metacognitive strategies is more the procedural side, or the skills side, so to speak. First, the awareness side. The word metacognitive awareness is again developed by Flevel. So he is at the basis, as I already said, of this course, of this concept of metacognition. And in his idea, metacognitive awareness is the basis of metacognitive skillfulness. What is metacognitive awareness? Well, it's the realization, so to speak, that you have done something successfully or unsuccessfully, that you failed something, and that you realize what the reason for your success or failure is. You're suddenly aware of what you have been doing, rightly or wrongly. And that is metacognitive awareness. So you may be successful in completing all kinds of tasks. Let's say that you are in a simple arithmetic situation in primary school, and that you are able to solve all kinds of multiplication problems easily, but then all of a sudden you realize that your, let's say, heuristics or algorithms fail in a new context, and then you realize that you actually applied these algorithms or heuristics, and that they led you to a success in a certain situation, but not in a new situation. So that awareness of the existence of these heuristics or algorithms or whatever arithmetic strategies you are implementing, that awareness, that's the first step in metacognition. Let's say the basis of metacognitive skillfulness. Flevel did his first experiment with children, let's say of 4, 5, 6, 7 years of age, and he asked them to play a memory game. You know, these kinds of games in which, let's say, you have cards with pictures on it, lying face down on the table. And what you have to do is you have to turn these cards and then see the picture, and then try to memorize the position of the card in a particular picture. Let's say that you have a tree, and you have a bird, and you have a horse, something like that, and you have to remember where the tree is and where the bird is and where the horse is. Now, okay, well, you do have this memory kind of game. I now am referring simply to a task in which you have something like let's say 8 of these cards lying face down on the table, and then you have to learn where the particular pictures are located by turning cards one by one and looking at the picture, then turning them back, and then another card, etc., etc. Okay. Now you imagine that you are children providing this particular task, and you say, okay, you have to do that, and then in the end you have to tell me what kind of pictures are on the various cards. Okay? Now, still, imagine that before children start to do this game, and they turn in the individual cards, and then after a while the time is up, something like that. So there's a fixed amount of time, and then what you do as an experimenter is you ask the children, how many pictures do you think you can identify properly? So is it 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or 8 or whatever? How many pictures do you think you know the location of? Now, then what you see is that young children, they overestimate their memory capacity, so to speak, their ability to locate these pictures. So they have some sort of meta-memory knowledge, as Flevel was naming that particular ability, but it was not correct. So they overestimated their ability. And after having providing feedback, they gradually adapted, their estimation, and so their meta-memory became more in order, so to speak. Okay, so that is what Flevel called meta-memory, and based on these experiments, he developed his ideas about metacognition, about the development of metacognitive skills, etc., etc. Okay, interesting. Now there are some awareness issues which are more recently being studied, and they are named feeling of knowing and judgment of learning. Now, feeling of judgment of learning is a bit like the meta-memory kind of concept. So you can imagine that you have to study a task, and that you are just right before the test, like the children were, and that at that particular moment somebody asks you, what do you think? What's your what's your idea of having learned this particular topic, or this particular exam, or this particular book, or whatever? Do you think you actually mastered the topic or not? And then you may answer, okay, I think I did my best, and I think I invested enough effort, and therefore I think I should earn a good grade. So that's your judgment of learning. That feeling, that judgment of learning is of course very important, because it helps you to predict what your grade will be. And when you arrive at a particular grade, so you get your grade, and you may compare it with your prediction. And when your idea was that you were very well prepared, and in fact did not receive a very positive grade, then you may reconsider, in this reflection phase, as Zimmerman was calling it in his model. You may reconsider the use of your strategies and whether you were in fact appropriately applying your study skills. So therefore this judgment of learning is very important. The feeling of knowing phenomenon is a bit more fundamental perhaps, and it has to do with the question, even after giving an answer to a particular question, whether you are certain about that answer. For instance, when people ask you who were the famous authors playing in the film Casablanca, you may be certain that it was Bergman who was playing there, or you may not be certain, or you may be uncertain about her first name, etc., as I'm at the moment, Ingrid Bergman, of course. And I can't remember the name of the man who played a very famous player, author, a very famous author, I think. But anyway, so your feeling of knowing is at stake here. For instance, when somebody is asking you, do you know the telephone number, the mobile phone number of the Pope? Well, you probably will say, no, I don't know it. I don't have it in my memory. So there's a very strong feeling of knowing, of not knowing in this case, which is interesting in itself, by the way. But so that feeling of knowing refers to how certain you are about a particular answer you gave on a question, or how certain you are that you do not know a particular answer on a question. So that's the feeling of knowing phenomenon. They both are examples of metacognitive awareness, of knowledge about your own cognition. Okay, so now we go into some detail about metacognitive strategies, knowing how to complete cognitive tasks. I have a list here of 7, and these 7 strategies are basically deduced from Zimmerman and Campillo's model, so you can relate them to that model and situate them in each of the 3 phases they distinguish. The full thought phase, of course, has to do with defining goals and selecting cognitive strategies to attain goals. Now, I like to refer to my own experience as a teacher of study skills when I worked at Leiden University, and when I trained first-year psychology students to actually improve their study skills. These were the kind of students who invested a lot of time and effort into preparing for the first exam, which is on introductory psychology. And in those days, I'm not sure it still is the same situation. They had to study a very voluminous book, let's say 800 pages, their first exam on, now let's say, the whole area of psychology. So experimental psychology, the developmental psychology, social psychology, everything. So that was their very first, let's say, exam, and they went through all, let's say, the major theories and concepts which are used in the domain of psychology, the general psychology domain. Okay, now some of these students were, of course, successful. They didn't arrive at my course on study skills, but some were not successful, although they had invested a lot of effort. So they were working very hard, but obviously did the wrong things. And one of the first things they did not do, and I tried to develop their skills, is the defining of the goals thing. Interestingly, well, these students often had the idea that the goal was very clear. They had to learn by heart all these 800 pages in the book. And of course, that was a quite high-level, high-stake goal, and most of them were not able to accomplish that goal. So they when the book had 800 pages, they ended, let's say, on page 165. At the time, they had to do the exam, so they were just not ready for the exam. Because they spent so many hours on studying all the pages of the book. And what I tried to train them to do is make a selection of the pages which were interesting or relevant or important or whatever, and the pages which were not. Within each chapter, to orient on the content of the chapter, and then what I try to do them is, in fact, write down some questions which could be answered by studying the chapter, and then, in fact, focusing on finding answers to these questions. Okay, so make a selection, basically. Study in a selective way. That's what I try to do there. But it has to do with this very first, strategy, defining goals. When you do not define goals, you are unable to select the cognitive strategies, which is the second important strategy to distinguish here in order to attain these goals. So you may think of a particular chapter or a part of the chapter as being less relevant, and you may think of skimming this section and paying more attention, deeper attention to other sections. So you may, let's say, adopt various strategies for various sections within chapters according to your estimation of the relevance and the value and the importance of the particular section. Okay, so that is a matter of selecting cognitive strategies in order to attain your goals. Progress monitoring is also very important, of course, and again, when you do not have goals, you are not able to monitor whether you are arriving at these goals. So progress monitoring has to do with calculating the amount of time you still have available, the amount of resources you have available, the way you should distribute your resources, your attention, etc., etc. And you have to monitor that constantly in order to be able to change your strategy accordingly. Arranging a learning environment is a bit of a different sort of strategy. Here I think you might adopt a more behaviorist approach. because the basic idea behind this strategy is that you have to reduce all kinds of distractors in your environment. The behaviorists do not think that you have to choose a particular goal in order to be successful in learning, but you have to organize the conditions of learning. So you have to focus on the conditions of learning. You have to arrange, a desk which is clean, for instance, or an environment, a room where you're not distracted by your telephone or by television or any kinds of modern social media or whatever. And that in that situation where there's no distraction, there you can focus on what you have to do, namely studying your textbook or doing your preparations for an exam or whatever. So arranging a learning environment is basically arranging the conditions for learning in a sensible way. Time management has to do, of course, with progress monitoring. You have to allocate your resources, the available time, in order to arrive at the goals you've set. And again, when there are no goals, you cannot do time management. Then we are in Zimmerman and his colleague modeled at the reflection phase, where you evaluate and adapt the available strategies according to the outcomes and your success or your failure. And that again is a very important reflection activity which you can do when you have set goals and when you can, let's say, see whether these goals are met. So you can compare the goals with the results and see what went well and what did not go well, etc. And again, of course, then there is the attribution thing, which is also a very important part of your reflection phase, where you try to find out whether it was you who organized your success, or whether it were the conditions, the circumstances, which led to a success. Whether it was you who was mainly responsible for your failures, or whether it were the conditions again. Perhaps the explanation of the task, of the assignments was not clear, or you simply did not know which book to study or whatever. It was not specified by the teacher, and therefore you arrived at a wrong preparation for the exam. So you have to consider that and being frank and discuss it with your colleagues. All these activities are relevant in, let's say, learning from what you have done, from your cognitive activities. And that, of course, is a matter of developing your self-regulation skills, or what you can also call it your metacognitive skillfulness. Okay, these are metacognitive strategies which contribute to your knowing how to complete cognitive tasks. So therefore we have now discussed in the second unit awareness and strategies, and we have a basic idea what metacognition and self-regulated learning are about.